Hello everybody. Today I'll be starting a new series where I'll be discussing the vascular physiology of the cardiovascular system, and this series is especially intended for all the first professional MBBS students who will soon have to give their exams. And I know it's a very tough situation which they're facing, and being the senior, I'm just trying to ease the way a bit. So, in this first video, I'll be discussing the cardiac muscle mechanics. And first of all, the first thing I discuss is regarding the systolic performance of the heart. Now, what you need to remember is that the systolic performance of the heart is determined by three main factors. One is your preload, next is the contractility of the inotropic state, and third is the afterload. Now, what is meant by the preload? Preload is basically the volume of blood present in the ventricle before it starts contracting, and it's basically the end diastolic volume. The preload is also determined by the end diastolic pressure, but in common parlance, we take the end diastolic volume as the best marker. Then there's the contractility of the ventricles, and finally is the afterload. Afterload is the pressure against which the ventricle has to contract. Now the best marker for this is the total peripheral resistance or the systemic vascular resistance. However, for all clinical purposes, we take the systolic blood pressure, the diastolic blood pressure, or the mean arterial blood pressure as common indices for the afterload. So let's first deal with the preload. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this curve. There's the Frank-Starling curve and the law, that is the Frank-Starling law. And now I'll first discuss the Frank-Starling law. Now, to discuss the Frank-Starling law, let me take the example of a rubber band. Now, when you're stretching a rubber band, initially it will recoil back with great force when you release it. On further stretching, it will recoil back with even further force. But there will come a time when the rubber band will ultimately break. So that's the basic concept behind the Frank-Starling law. That is, within physiological limit, an increase in preload will cause an increase in the cardiac output of the heart. But mind you, within physiological limit, this phrase has to be uttered when anybody asks you about the Frank-Starling law. So now let's deal with the curve. It's quite simple. One second. So this is the stroke volume, or that is the cardiac output index. This is the left ventricular end diastolic volume, and you can see that with increase in end diastolic volume, the stroke volume is also increasing, but up to a limit. This is the physiological limit. Now this curve is perhaps the most important curve in the cardiovascular system. Apparently it looks very simple, but we can derive a great amount of information from this curve. A first example regarding that I'll give you in just now. So now this looks a bit complicated. I'll explain to you. Focus on this orange curve. This is the normal Frank-Starling curve. If you take the cardiac output on the y-axis, normal cardiac output, and you extrapolate it to the x-axis, you will get the E0, that is the end diastolic volume for which we have C0, or the normal cardiac output. Now suppose there occurs an event like a myocardial infarction. A myocardial infarction is a common index event for heart failure. So what is an index event? An index event is anything which sets off a chain of reactions. So a myocardial infarction is a common index event for heart failure. So after myocardial infarction, the curve will shift down and to the right as well. So now for the same end diastolic volume, the cardiac output is C1, which is significantly lower and is not sufficient to maintain the for the normal metabolic demands of the body. So what happens? Compensatory mechanisms are activated. That is the sympathetic nervous system and the RAS, that is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, is activated. This will cause fluid retention and the end diastolic volume will increase to E1. Now, if you project this value to the secondary Frank-Starling curve which we have obtained, then we get another cardiac output, that is C2, which is quite close to C1. Now, if I were to apply all these changes on a single curve, it will look something like this. So what happens is that this is a single Frank-Starling curve, and this is the point after heart failure has set in. So to maintain the normal cardiac output, the end diastolic volume has to be increased to E1, which is possible by the activation of the RAS and sympathetic nervous system. And so this gap, that is E1 minus E0, is actually the volume of congested blood in the veins. This is a very important information which we gather from the Frank-Starling curve. And if you want further information regarding the pathogenesis of heart failure, what are the actual series of events that occur, I would request you to refer to one of my previous videos where I have discussed the same. Okay, now we move on to the second part, where we will discuss the contractility portion. So what is meant by contractility? Contractility is any change in the force of contraction at any given sarcomeal length. So your sarcomeal length is the constant, the sarcomeal length of the cardiac myocytes, but the intracellular calcium is the changing factor over here. And to measure the contractility, two main indices are used. One is ejection fraction and another is the left ventricular pressure. So now let's come to this curve. Focus on the pink curve first. The pink curve is the normal curve before any mechanisms have set in place. Now, if by any chance we manage to increase the intracellular calcium inside the cardiac myocytes, it may be a sympathetic nervous system activation, it may be the effect of certain drugs like digoxin. Then what happens? The curve will become the red one. Essentially, there will be an increase in contractility, but what are the actual changes which we observe graphically? Number one, there is an increase in dP by dt, that is, there will be an increase in pressure with respect to time, pressure meaning the left ventricular pressure. The second thing which we can observe is there is an increase in the peak of the left ventricular pressure. The third change we can observe is that there is an increased rate of relaxation of the ventricle. And finally, there is a decrease in the diastolic interval. So all these changes, their respective points are marked on this curve, and you can easily correlate between these factors. So these are the factors which will influence the cardiac contractility response. Okay, and finally, let's move on to afterload. Now the best marker for afterload, if you ask me, is the total peripheral resistance, but clinically we use the systolic blood pressure, the diastolic blood pressure, and the mean arterial pressure. And I'd like you to remember that the diastolic blood pressure is a direct marker for the total peripheral resistance. Now the afterload is mainly increased in three settings. that is when there is increase in the mean arterial blood pressure, when there is an onset of aortic stenosis, and when there is also an increase in total peripheral resistance. So when there is an increase in afterload, suppose this is a tube and you suddenly constrict the lumen of the tube and you are pouring water from above it, initially there will be difficulty in the outflow of the water. But what happens is that with respect to the heart, when there is obstruction in the outflow of blood, the left ventricle chamber will slightly dilate, and in response to that there will be the activation of the Frank-Starling mechanism, by which they will contract given with an increased force for that end diastolic volume. That is, there is an increase in the end diastolic volume, and consequently there will be an increase in cardiac output. So initially, with increase in afterload, there will be a decrease in stroke volume, but following this there will be an increase in stroke volume. Are you getting me? That is, first the stroke volume will decrease, as a result of which the end diastolic volume will increase, as a result of which the preload will increase, and finally the cardiac output will increase. So both increase in preload and afterload will ultimately lead to an increase in cardiac output. So in this curve, I have summarized all the findings which you find in a Frank-Starling curve with respect to changes in the contractility, preload and afterload. And over here, yes, I have written that an increase in afterload will shift the Frank-Starling curve to the down and to the right side, but ultimately it will go up. And an increase in contractility, decreased cardiac output and an increased preload will shift the Frank-Starling curve to the top and to the left. Finally, in this curve, I have tried to summarize the change in blood pressure or cardiac output with respect to change in the total peripheral resistance. And we can see that when there is very low peripheral resistance, there is a very high cardiac output or a very high blood pressure. And the situations where we can see them are very in the presence of arteriovenous shunts, in hyperthyroidism and in anemia. Now why is there an increase in cardiac output, or let's say a decrease in total peripheral resistance when there is hyperthyroidism? Well, the mechanism is that thyroxine hormone will increase the basal metabolic rate, which will ultimately lead to vasodilatation, which will cause a decrease in the total peripheral resistance. And this orange line demarcates the normal cardiac output and the corresponding total peripheral resistance normally we can find out. Okay, and on the descending limb over here, we can see that a fall in cardiac output is observed with a greatly increased total peripheral resistance, observed when there is amputation of both arms and legs and when there is hypothyroidism. So beriberi and hypothyroidism causes maximum change in the blood pressure or cardiac output. So that's for the first video. I'll come back with the next video with a more elaborate discussion on the cardiac output regulatory mechanisms and the venous return regulatory mechanisms. Thank you.